Okay, welcome back to members of a 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, into our ongoing study in Wolfhart Pannenberg and his Volume 1 of his Systematic Theology. We're going to continue in the chapter on God is Triune, pages 281 to 290. It'll be part 3, and the title of the lesson is the title to Block 3, so go to Block 3. Systematic Reformed Theology in Block 1, and Neoplatonism and Emanation Theology in Block 2 came together in Thomas Aquinas and his Aristotelian theology. So a very strong influence here from Greek philosophy. But what we're looking at, again, is the ongoing struggle to work through a doctrine of the Trinity. I mean, after all, it is a divine mystery. No one has ever solved it perfectly. Instead, what is required is to simply be engaged with the struggle. You're not going to come up with a final perfect answer. I don't care what seminary you go to or what divinity school you go to, no one can clearly, precisely make sense of this doctrine of the triune Godhead. What you want to do is you want to be engaged with it all the time because you're engaged with a biblical worldview in your life. Therefore, you want to be engaged with a understanding of God as triune, because you have a biblical worldview. That's the goal. That's all that is expected, is be engaged, be diligent and prayerful and meditative. And so now we're ready to get going here. Let's go to Block 1. And Block 1 is Reformation theology. Block 2 is Eastern mysticism. Then Block 3 will be the Church Doctor, Thomas Aquinas. So let's go to Reformed theology, Block 1. We're going to look at Melanchthon. We're going to look at John Calvin. And Philip Melanchthon wrote the Reformation truth. I mean, let's face it, the Reformation, of course, was initiated through Martin Luther, but Martin Luther named Philip Melanchthon as his successor, and Philip Melanchthon put the Articles of Faith together in the Augsburg Confession. Okay, Block 1, Note 1. Philip Melanchthon, 1497 to 1560. He was the first systematic theologian of the Reformation. He wrote the Augsburg Confession of 1530, defining the Lutheran faith that consisted of 21 articles. It included the doctrine of the Trinity. There is one divine essence that is eternal, that exists as three co-eternal personhoods, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There you go. That's Council of Nicaea, isn't it, my friends? And Constantinople. Then we go to John Calvin, 1509 to 1564. He wrote Calvin's Institutes, a very systematic Reformation theology. I have Calvin's Institutes in my library here. It's a massive work, but it is systematic Reformation theology. He was in Geneva. The Institutes were written between 1539 and 1559. It emphasized God's absolute sovereignty. He posited that God is in three distinct co-eternal persons. Father as the originator, Son as the Word, Holy Spirit as the executor. without any notion of subordination. In other words, co-eternal, co-substantial, no notion of any subordination. The doctrine of the Trinity became a specific Christian revelation in the Reformation of God as supreme being. The Trinity of personhood was a pure truth of faith, not a truth of human reason. No, it demanded faith. And the doctrine of the divine attributes should come first, and then the doctrine of the Trinity, said the Reformation. But I love the fact they said the doctrine of the Trinity, it's a truth of faith. You're not going to explain God. You're not going to perfectly explain the nature of God, the Creator, with the faculty of human reason. You're not going to do it. The doctrine of the Trinity is a doctrine of the pure truth of faith. Now we go to block 2, and it's very interesting. Block 2 is very important, so pay attention here, because Christianity, and we've had discussions in this area before in previous lessons, but Paul did lecture at the Stoic Academy in Athens during his ministry. He was invited to lecture at the Stoic Academy, and the dominant philosophy in the first century was Stoicism and Neoplatonism. And we're going to talk about that because it did very much influence Christianity. Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite from the 5th century. He formed a Christian theology in unity with Neoplatonism. Okay, pay attention here. What is Neoplatonism? It was founded by Plotinus in the 3rd century. It posited a single transcendent source called the One, out of which flowed the divine emanations. It posited an emanation philosophy. And the emanations moved through nous, mind, to psyche, soul, to sarx, matter. And Neoplatonism emphasized the believer's goal of a mystical union with the One, a meditative mystical union with the One. And theology was apophatic, or negative theology. In other words, defining God was beyond human reason. We approach God through negation. Underline that. We approach God through negation. He viewed the Trinity as the one super essential unity that was beyond being, beyond rational comprehension. Now we're going to jump to the 11th century and take a look at mysticism in Anselm of Canterbury. He was a Benedictine monk and a Catholic theologian. The Trinity was one divine essence and consisted of 3 co-equal and co-eternal personhoods, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Distinction was understood as a relational distinction between the triune members of the Godhead. The Father is the internal, perfect love. The Son is the external, incarnate, human nature taken on for the plan of salvation. He affirmed 1 ousia essence and 3 hypostasis personhoods. We run into that agreed upon definition again, and what we learn is that it's continually a doctrine to be engaged spiritually and intellectually and academically, and it still keeps the agreed upon basic definition, but it's always an ongoing struggle to really work through a doctrine of the Trinity, and that's the way it should be for us also. It is a reality beyond human rationalism. Now, Block 3. Systematic Reformed theology that we had in Block 1, and Neoplatonism and emanation theology we discussed in Block 2. They came together in the 1300s, and Thomas Aquinas, who had a great appreciation for Aristotle and the Greek philosophy of Aristotle. He kind of linked Christian theology with Aristotelian philosophy. He was a Dominican friar, and he is considered one of the greatest ever doctors of the Church. His view of the Trinity: the Father begets the Son as the divine Word. The Holy Spirit proceeds. Now, put a big circle under that. Underline it, circle it, highlight it. The Holy Spirit proceeds from the mutual love between the Father and the Son as an expression of the Father's processions out of the Father's knowing. The Son proceeds out of the turn in love of the Father in his will to reconcile his creation. The Son and the Spirit are actions of procession out of the Father as subsistent, ongoing relations in the triune Godhead. But notice how Neoplatonism did influence Aquinas, because he, in a way, is talking about emanations, but he uses the term procession. The Son proceeds out of the Father. The Holy Spirit proceeds out of the love between the Father and the Son. It's the theological concept of procession. Again, what we find here in this lesson, and Pannenberg is correct, we don't find a huge variation on the basic doctrine all the way back to Nicaea in 325 AD. What we find is a academic theological engagement with the doctrine all the time. It's always a matter of academic struggle and discussion. Why? Because everyone is actively living a Christian world view, a Christ-centered world view, and because they live a Christ-centered world view, they want to continue to struggle, although not perfectly understand, a triune doctrine of the Godhead. And what we have here is 3 examples of how that academic and theological struggle unfolded. In Block 1, the Reformation struggled with it. Melanchthon is the first systematic theologian of the Reformation. John Calvin was huge in Geneva, a big contributor to the Geneva Bible that was a challenge to the Catholic faith. And he wrote Calvin's Institutes, very powerful. I have it in 1 volume, but it's really a huge book because it's multiple volumes, but I got one that was all combined into 1 volume. Got it years ago when I was a brand new Christian. I actually picked up Calvin's Institutes as a 1-year-old Christian. But Block 2, we've got to look at the fact that Neoplatonism did play a role in imprinting early Christian theology. It really did. It really did. And Platonists basically talked about a divine one, the one, and emanations or processions flowed out of the one, and they passed through a hierarchy of divinity called the pleroma, the fullness of the Godhead, as a nous mind, psyche, soul, sarx, matter, or sarx, surface reality. And so meditation would seek to reach unity with the one, with the divine one, and you would work through transcending sarx, surface reality, penetrating psyche, soul reality, and eventually entering nous, mind reality, and genuine mystical meditation within and with the divine one. That was Neoplatonism, and it played a role in early Christian theology struggling to become a written actual doctrine. And then Thomas Aquinas, yes, he was a Catholic, yes, he was a Dominican friar, but Thomas Aquinas is not restricted to the Catholic faith. Protestants genuinely appreciate Thomas Aquinas. I have multiple volumes of his work. His great work was the Summa Theologia. I have 3 volumes of his Summa Theologia. I have 10 volumes of Karl Barth's Dogmatics. And they were 2 doctors of the church, Thomas Aquinas and Karl Barth. And you can't go wrong getting work from either one of these great, great Christian professors. And so I don't care if he was Catholic, I don't care if he was Dominican, Thomas Aquinas should be in your Protestant library as well. This gives us a very good part 3 to the doctrine of the triune Godhead. That wraps up 281 to 290. And next lesson we will pick up on part 4 of God as triune.